Hey there. Welcome to another webinar with Nested Knowledge. My name is Jeff Johnson. I'm the Chief Design Officer over here at Nested Knowledge, and I'm playing MC today. I really want to just have this conversation with Sabrina Hanna. And so we're going to start with a quick round of introductions, and then we're going to dive right into it. The topic today is patient centricity in, I got another. Sorry, I got a stream going. Okay. So I want to have this conversation. The patient centricity in HTA, in health technology assessments, in that process. Catherine, do you want to just introduce yourself briefly?
Hey guys, I'm Catherine Cowie. I lead operations at Nested Knowledge. I'm also a patient advocate with the Every Life Foundation's chapter, the Young Adult Rare Representatives. I'm excited for this webinar.
Okay, and Renita?
Hi everyone, Renita Tarchan, the Scientific Director here at Nested Knowledge. I am a health economist and an epidemiologist by training, and I work with pharmaceutical industry, contract research organizations, academics, and institutions that are conducting research for the HTA process, as well as the overall academic published literature.
Excellent. And I should say too, if you're out there in the audience today and you're watching and this topic is interesting to you, feel free to chime in with your questions. Wherever you're watching today, I can see your question and I will try to field that question and bring that question up and incorporate you into the conversation. We'd love to hear from you today. Last but not least, our special guest, Sabrina, do you want to just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do at the Cancer Collaborative?
Yeah, my name is Sabrina Hanna, like you just said, and I am the Chief Change Officer at the Cancer Collaborative. And the Cancer Collaborative is an advocacy think tank, or at least I like to think of it like an advocacy think tank. And we're based out of Canada in Montreal, but with a national focus. And we're looking at the healthcare system from the oncology lens and looking at where the gaps are. You know, of course, in Canada, we have a public payer system. And so, you know, once it's been regulated or approved by regulators, it doesn't necessarily mean access for all. And so ensuring that patients who have cancer are getting the medicines that they need when they need them.
Excellent.
In a nutshell.
Yeah, and we can maybe later on get into some of the differences between different payer systems across different geographies, but that will be very interesting. So my first question today is, how can patients become stakeholders in the HTA process? The reason we're asking this question is because a lot of members of our audience work in health economics, outcomes research, are responsible for putting together a lot of the SLRs that go into an HTA submission. And are interested, I think, in making sure to bring that patient perspective into those submissions and into the overall process as well. So how can patients become better stakeholders in the HTA process?
Yeah, well, I think that there needs to be a space in the HTA process for that patient engagement. So, you know, in Canada, we've got a really robust HTA process, and the patient input is really well embedded into that process. But having said that, you know, as someone who has done the patient submissions, I don't know what happens with the input that I provide into the HTA submissions. So, I mean, I know that like the information that we're providing to HTA is not as objective as the information that the clinical trial, the manufacturers are providing, and it's not as you know, there's no algorithm or formula like the health economy reviews that are happening. But I think, you know, it's important to look at it and think about, well, you know, like if we're taking that patient input, like what impact is that going to have on the HTA process? Are we thinking about it in a way where like at the end of the day, is the decision that we're making going to make an impact for the patients? So, I mean, I just rambled a lot. Yeah. I think, you know, there's got to be a lot of capacity building from the HTA to the patients. There's got to be a place for them to be embedded into the process. But I think when we're thinking about HTA, and it's not just about patient engagement. It's got to be more than that. And so it's great that you have that option to do the patient input. But, for example, if I'm thinking about surrogate endpoints, which are not widely accepted in HTA right now, so right now, the gold standard is overall survival. But if you're thinking about a surrogate endpoint that isn't overall survivor, that can have a really big impact for patients, how is that being reviewed into the process? So again, a lot of things just to say that it's great to have that patient engagement, the capacity building, but we need to think about how patients can be involved in that process beyond that.
A lot to unpack there, and a lot of interesting. It's a great way to start this webinar because, you're bringing up a couple of really interesting things that I kind of want to dive into. Can we create that space? Can we create that space? I want to go to Bernita and Catherine on this. When it comes to some of these more formal, I'm not sure I would even call them necessarily always objective. Everybody has an argument that they're trying to make with data. Can we make that space for the patient perspective when it comes to putting together some of the collateral that has to go into the evidence that actually makes up these submissions? Let's start with Renita. What do you think?
Yeah, this is a great question. I will say we already see the clinician's point of view. We certainly see the economist's point of view and the industry's point of view by and large. Why not the patient? They can have a role in topic selection, in scoping of the published literature. They have a necessary perspective beyond just the metrics that they are reported. So things like health-related quality of life. And like Sabrina mentioned, a lot of these HTA agencies, I know Scotland, Australia, Canada with CADIT, they will have what they call like consumer committees or patient committees that do play a role in this, but it is really important to start the process off maybe earlier on, even towards clinical trial development, beyond just looking at the outcomes that are going on to say, okay, what is the impact of the drug or what is the burden of illness? Are committees doing that currently? I'm not sure. I do think there's a push towards that where patients can have involvement in scoping and topic selection. But if we can have the clinician, giving their input, we certainly can have the patient giving their input as well.
Yeah, just to add on that, on the patient committees, I think so. CADIT, which is now the Canadian Drug Agency, the CDA. They do have a patient committee, but how are the people who are sitting on that committee being selected? And are they picking the people who are going to agree with what they want to do and like whatever it is that they're implementing? Are they even asking them? I don't know. I don't know how these patient committees are involved, but how are they being selected? And are they like, I know that they will not ask the patients or the patient advocates who are confrontational or who are like really loud in asking for or in advocating for patients. So it's great that they have them, but how are they being selected? How are they really being used in the process?
And I can add to that. In the rare disease world, about 95% of rare diseases don't have a treatment. In advocacy spaces, people who are speaking out, advocating for rare disease tend to be in that 5% that have a drug. To have that extra time and energy to collaborate with the drug company and to participate in these processes often requires that you have at least some stability or financial resources. So there's the challenge when doing patient-centered HTA of how do you reach out in more novel ways that are more accessible to not just the super patients with lots of energy and access to effective treatments.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay. So HTA is part of this process, but arguably in many ways, you'd want that process to start even sooner right? Like the process of getting patients involved in the drug development process. Sabrina, can you talk a little bit about how you envision that happening? How can patients become stakeholders in earlier than even the HTA, the portion where you're saying, okay, now this drug is ready to go, let's get it onto the market, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting because I feel like there has been a lot of movement on the patient focused or the patient driven drug development. Whereas, like in HTA, we're talking a lot about the patient engagement in HTA, but we're not really talking about how we involve patients in HTA the way that we're doing it with the drug development.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's really important to involve the patients in the drug development, and like people are doing that. Like the FDA has guidelines now, if I'm not mistaken, on the patient focused drug development. I think in Europe there's the patient focused medicine developments group. So there's definitely a lot of headway that's been made there. I think we're like, without the regulatory bodies mandating or providing those guidelines,
Mm-hmm.
people are not going to get involved. Like in Canada, FDA's got their guidelines. In Canada, we don't have anything, so the manufacturers won't really push to start doing that until there is something that says they have to.
Okay. So when it comes to kind of this top-down approach, like really, you're saying basically HTA bodies sort of have to be involved in this process. HTA bodies, but also just anyone who's approving drugs, any agency at the top. So in the United States, yes, it's the FDA, and now it's starting to be like the CMS who's going to start to negotiate pricing and things like that. And it's all part of that system, that big monolithic system that just moves drugs through this approval process and then out into the world, into the patient population. And then the patients are left to kind of wonder, like, hey, how did this drug even come to be? So how can, knowing that that's ultimately, these are the bodies that are in charge of approving these drugs and getting them on and allowing them to be on the market, how can those bodies take a longer view, especially when it comes to things like cost effectiveness?
How can they take a longer view? I mean, I'm not entirely sure how they can take a longer view. I know that they need to take a longer view. Yeah. And I'm just thinking off the top of my head, CAR T is a really great example because that was a really expensive drug. Sure. And like a one-time infusion, and the clinical trials were done, as clinical trials are usually done on the super patients, right? The healthiest of the sickest. And so when they did, I believe it was like the 5-year or the long-term studies, they saw that CAR T was just as effective in older populations, in populations with, these older populations have comorbidities. And so it was just as effective. There was less healthcare resource utilization, less emergency room visits, less doctor visits. So long-term, that impact of having that one-time infusion, it's not taken into consideration when they're doing that HTA review. So they're looking at the drug like $450,000 let's say, approximately. Yeah. And the decision makers are like, this is a very expensive drug, but they're not thinking how this drug or how the cost of this drug is going to be, the cost savings of this drug down the line from that one moment in time. And so I think that's like a missed opportunity. And the same thing happened here in Canada for the Hep C drugs. So like curative. And so you don't have to do anything else after you get this treatment, but it was really expensive at the time. And it took a really long time to get that into the system. And why? Because it was expensive. So I think if we start thinking about it a little bit more long-term versus how we're doing it now, then, maybe the risk, there's a little bit less risk that we're...
Sure. Sure, absolutely. Well, it's not just about like from the patient perspective. Like, yeah, there's risk is part of that calculus, right? Mortality is part of that calculus that the patient's thinking about. Like, okay, do I take this drug? What are the risks associated with it? For me, not necessarily for society, but for me, right? But there's probably other things that we can look at. So I want to talk to Renita a little bit about study design. How could you incorporate this into like an SLR that's going to go into an HTA submission and account for all these factors? But first, Catherine, let's talk. We just had a conversation like internally. We just went one of our kind of our meetings. We were talking about I think it was ATMPs, right? Like really advanced therapies that are extremely expensive, but often curative, right? Like you take one dose of this drug, it's $2.2 million or whatever, but you're good to go. And this, it dramatically improves not just your chances of not dying from this particular disease, but also, having a really high quality life for many years after that, and a very productive life. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Catherine? Like, especially in the rare disease space, more your perspective.
Sure. So advanced therapy medicinal products, ATMPs, include gene therapies and cell therapies like CAR T that Sabrina mentioned. Some of them are curative, including sickle cell disease has a CRISPR therapeutic out that really has the potential to save many patients, improve life dramatically. But evidence is weak because many of the disease populations treated by these drugs have small sizes. Many of the studies are also single-armed because it's sometimes unethical to randomize patients with a terminal illness into a placebo arm when there's no other treatments on the market. So because clinical evidence is so weak, we really can't rely on randomized clinical trials, and we need to use novel elements of value to determine the cost effectiveness of that treatment. So there's a lot of room for innovation in how HTA is done for these complex gene therapies and cell therapies.
And by the way, this is going to be like required in Europe. I mean, we talk about geography all the time. There's a lot of differences across geography, but there's going to be this joint clinical assessment. I hear 2025, this is going to be a problem because you're going to have to do systematic literature reviews. You're going to have to get your all of your little PICO in a row in order to make the case for your ATMP to get to market. Renita, can you talk a little bit about study design? I know Sabrina mentioned endpoints. Catherine's talking about the limitations of some of the literature available for therapies like this. What's your perspective on how to design a better HTA submission for products like that?
Yeah, great. Sabrina and Catherine both bring up huge gaps that we have in this value story or even the value communication that's involved in the HTA process. On the rare disease front, we need to see acceptance of more like experimental single arm trials where they're doing, using models to actually use the comparative, because we're not able to get that evidence, just like Catherine said. I had a really interesting conversation coming out of the HTAI conference with members of NICE that really centered around the importance of being able to use those models to address those gaps in the literature and also accept them through the regulatory HTA agencies. On the cost-effective front, it is great to see that the obsession with cost-effectiveness metrics is slowly coming to an end as an industry and also as health economics as a field of study. I think by and large, cost-effective was dominating the field, where we had a large obsession with metrics like the quality and the daily, and put, I think, too much weight on those metrics without looking at things like health-related quality of life outcomes. Now we see those metrics increasing with their presence, but I think I said before, metrics are not enough here. We do need to see more of a shift towards perspectives and even some testimonials or stories leading into those HTA submissions. And where in the research design does this maybe take place? We can see this in the burden of illness review. in our cost-effective review and in our clinical comparative effectiveness, really those are hard research designs to manipulate, where when we see that burden of illness review, there is a little bit more, I think, ability to have a creative research design to incorporate more elements of a patient's experience or story, or even just to include metrics beyond the health-related quality of life to communicate some of the other value of a drug beyond just the clinical comparative effectiveness or the cost effectiveness.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Jeff,
To kind of, yeah, add on to it, please.
Just going to jump in there. I think that's a really good question, because like a lot of the, like with the work that I'm doing in HTA, I think about like, is HTA asking the right questions? But then at the same time, the other side of that is the clinical trial design to even answer those HTA questions. And a lot of the time it's not. So I think we need to think about the questions that we're asking, and are they relevant for today, and are they really beneficial for patients and for the different stakeholders, so the payers, the clinicians, whoever's involved.
Exactly, Sabrina. That's really what I'm trying to get at. How are we supposed to get that evidence if we don't have the correct surveys, if we don't even have I suppose, standardized metrics to be able to compare how we're asking the questions beyond just what was the patient's experience, how are they addressing their activities of daily living. I see a lot of health-related quality of life outcomes scales that are literally just looking at that. Okay, how did it affect their activities of daily living? But we don't talk about things like access. How were they able to? What was their ease of use to access this drug, or to to get into the hospital, to get the treatment in the first place? I think that is a really interesting topic that needs to be addressed in the HTA burden of illness review, and it's not something that we see very often, or even I think have a lot of evidence on. I think firms are scraping to get by just to even give, for a lot of these drugs, a quality of life metric, and that is like bare minimum. So I think that's a really interesting point, and it's a necessary one to discuss. And like I mentioned, some of these meetings, we do try to talk about that, but a lot of it is, a lot left to be resolved, I think.
Yeah. And Renita, you said, sorry, Jeff, I'm taking over. My podcast head is
that's the goal.
Rita, you said, I think you talked about value. And I think that is also like a really important question, because I think a patient would define the value of a drug differently than a payer would define the value of the drug. And so, when we're thinking about value, like value for whom?
Mm-hmm.
That I love that. Yeah. Value perspectives. I had mentioned value stories, and even when we look at like what is the HTA going into, it's going into the global value dossier. But exactly right, Sabrina, it is really from the perspective of the payer, and it is from the perspective of the industry making that argument to the payer that yes, this drug does have efficacy, and it does deserve to be on the market, and it should be reimbursed accordingly. But we don't talk about, what the value could be to a patient. Even things like, we're talking about cancer here, so we must talk about things like, maybe not even mortality, but relapse rates, and like what quality of life are they having after their treatment has concluded, risk of reoccurrence of their illness. This is a very severe illness, and it should be treated accordingly. But we have to think about what impact it's having on the patient's life, and their overall state of being. And I don't think that the HTA process addresses that very well right now. But like Jeff mentioned, maybe we'll see that with the JCA coming into play in 2025.
Well, that
I heard an example.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I heard an example from a patient with spinal muscular atrophy about an outcome of interest. He said that he measures his health and his well-being by his ability to open the refrigerator door. So drugs that help him open the refrigerator door are those worth value. And those kind of individual preferences are quite hard to capture, but we may be able to find novel economic methods to reflect those individual patient preferences.
Yeah, that's tough. Maybe that is impossible to capture every patient's preference in something so broad. Sabrina, do you see any ways to make like if you had your way with for example with the JCA framework that's coming forth and is really pretty solidified at this point, but obviously is going to evolve over time. If you had your way with it, how would you make that output, that HTA output, because ultimately it's to serve the people, right? It's to serve all of these patients and all of us as populations. Like that should be the goal, whether you feel that that's true or not. What would you do to make that output, that HTA final decision more palatable, more acceptable, and ultimately, how would you make it serve the people that it's meant to best?
Well, I think, we're coming into a space where patients are more educated, they're more empowered, they want to be more involved in their healthcare journeys or experiences. And so I think, we need, when we're thinking about HTA, we talked about how there needs to be a little bit of innovation in HTA. I think we need to start thinking about it differently. And so just as an example, there was a hospital in the UK, and this is even before patient centricity was a buzzword. There was a hospital in the UK that rebuilt their oncology center with the patients. And so in that hospital before, the oncology center was in the basement, and the patients, some of them have a terminal illness. They don't want to go into the basement where it feels like, a morgue. They're already not well, and they don't want to go down. They want to have windows, have greenery. And so, they ask the patients, what do you want in your oncology center? And that's how they built their hospital. And so I think we need to think about that when we're building HTA, when we're building policy, when we're building whatever it is that we're doing, processes or whatever it is. We need to start thinking about the patients who are going to be impacted at the end of the line. And we're not doing that now. And so I really believe that if we started doing that, and I think part of it is that we think of patients as patients, and we don't think of them outside of being people with a disease. And they could be anybody. They could be doctors, they could be engineers, they could be computer scientists, they could be health economists, they could be anybody. And so they have knowledge and perspective that they can bring to the conversation that is valuable.
Yeah.
And we need to start asking patients. So I think for me that is what I would like to start to see happen, I don't remember the original question, but that's what I would like.
No, you've answered it. Yeah. How can we make HTA outputs acceptable to all of the variety of different audiences that it's supposed to be acceptable to, and primarily that's people. That's the people who are ultimately going to take these drugs and stuff. Of course, there's other perspectives in that whole conglomeration too. There are the drug makers. There are the rest of us who do not yet have some sort of disease that we're all going to die. So it's all going to happen eventually. And so there's lots of different perspectives in that. But today we're talking about patient centricity. Just a follow-up question, Sabrina, and I know this is maybe just kind of out of the blue, but just for my own edification, what is the difference between patient-centered and patient centricity? I've seen both terms bandied about. What does that mean? What's the difference, and why is that language difference important to you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's important because I think our healthcare is already patient-centered. It's centered around the patient, but it's not built with the patient. It's not co-created with the patient. And so when I think about patient centricity, I think about something that is co-created with the people that it's meant to serve versus just being for them.
Yeah. And that's like hospitals, right? All the way up to the formal institutions which oversee these things, like the HTA bodies, and the whole
Well,
apparatus.
the hospital example is a really good one. Hospitals are patient-centered, but they're not patient-centric. But the hospital in the UK that built their oncology center with the patients would be patient-centric.
Yeah, I like that. I like that distinction a lot. That's really important. Okay, so obviously,
Catherine, I don't know that Catherine agrees with me, so it would be good to hear her.
Oh, okay. Well, then let's have a debate. Catherine, go ahead.
I
What do
mean,
you think?
I do agree that distinction is there, but I don't want to see a future where everyone claims to be patient-centric. There's a quote from The Incredibles: "If everyone's special, then no one is. If everyone's claiming to be patient-centric, then we no longer have a way to figure out who's truly incorporating patient voices." For example, if insurance companies start advertising themselves as being patient-centric, that might raise some alarm bells to me.
Yeah. Well, I think part of the problem is that, like a lot of the other things in this space, there's not really a definition of what patient-centric is. And so patient-centric and patient-centered is being used interchangeably. And so without that definition of what patient-centric is, it's just kind of being thrown out there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we need that definition first.
Yeah.
Excellent. I just want to also tell everybody who's watching today, you can submit your questions. So shoot us a comment on YouTube, on LinkedIn, wherever you happen to be watching today, and I will try to surface your comment and bring you into this conversation to keep this webinar moving along. I want to pivot a little bit and talk a little bit about what we do at Nested Knowledge. So we're a tiny little piece of this whole puzzle. A lot of our customers use our platform to do systematic literature reviews for HTA submissions. And as we've been talking about throughout this conversation, there are various opportunities, even with the structures that we have in place today, to sort of make a difference and advocate for those different patient perspectives and pull those into, as Renita is saying, into that study design for that burden of illness review. So Catherine, do you want to maybe pull up Nested Knowledge, talk a little bit about what we do, what our software is for, and then Catherine or Renita, chime in. Go ahead.
Sorry about that. While Catherine is pulling that up, I would hope to also include a definition as well. I don't have a good perspective on patients versus patient-centric, but I will offer another definition of patient-based evidence versus patient involvement, because these are two different sides of a very similar coin. And in terms of our patient-based evidence definition, this is really where our qualitative research designs come in. We're talking about things that are reporting a patient outcome, or maybe it's a survey design, maybe it was a registry, something that is coming from the patient's perspective or is coming from a response. And this is where a lot of our patient-reported outcomes are originating from. And I do want to give a shout out to the HTA agencies that are working very hard to perform gap analyses, scoping reviews. There is work being done. I admire particularly the work that's being done at the HTA body in Scotland for healthcare improvement. They are conducting various rapid reviews for patient-based evidence to see where the gaps may be in different diseases and disease states. And then we have our patient involvement, which is more of our, consumer groups, our committees that are going and informing different research designs or trying to incorporate the patient perspective at different points in the HTA process. While Catherine is pulling that up, I do want to mention that there is application of a tool like this in both sides of these two coins. Of course, if you're supporting these academics or these HTA bodies that are conducting the SLRs or the scoping reviews or the gap analysis, you are doing, you are referring to the published evidence. And like you can see here, we have a research design that is looking at heart failure and kind of doing a very good job of scoping out what those outcomes are, what the patient populations are, what are the interventions of interest. And of course, in our patient involvement, we also do have the same side of the coin where we might be looking at, what has been said in a qualitative research design, what may the survey responses be, what are topics of interest in the space that can be reported and then built upon for our HTA value dossiers. Catherine, over to you to talk a little bit more about this.
Yeah, so Nested Knowledge is a platform for evidence synthesis, as you may already know. It starts with literature search, where you can pull in trials from PubMed and other sources like clinicaltrials.gov, and you can update this literature source live. So as new trials are published in the space, right away, it'll get pulled in to your research project. We also have a unique concept of tagging, where you can label studies in a way that allows you to create accessible outputs showing patient interventions and outcomes. And you can imagine that you can modify these outputs to include a section on patient-reported outcomes as well. It also produces a manuscript output, if you like, and that could be used to make plain language summaries. If you wanted to summarize your key results in terms of more accessible patient-facing language, you could use the Nested Knowledge synthesis to make simple, direct, accessible summaries. You need anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, you can imagine why a tool like this is useful in a patient-based evidence review, like the one I described earlier. These are notorious for being not very unstandardized. They're qualitative research designs, and they require a lot of topic scoping. So a software like this, where you're maybe conducting a rapid review, or you're looking to published evidence to see what a potential topic of interest might be in the space, or to even say, what do these trials or these surveys actually have in common? Really useful for that use case. But I also want to mention that systematic literature review is notorious for being extremely costly to the industry, to the HTA bodies, to really anybody that's conducting it, simply because of the human resources that it requires, and the aspect that is that the evidence will continue to emerge. A software like this is best utilized in the HTA process to maintain a sustainable evidence synthesis process. And I do want to mention that our HTA partners, such as ICER, and of course our use case in the industry, I would say this is probably the biggest cost savings and efficiency that's to be gained, is to be able to keep up with the updated literature for rare disease, oncology, any other disease state that you might be studying.
Absolutely. So thank you for sharing that, Catherine, and for chiming in, Renita. I want to go to some audience questions here. So I've got a question here. I'm gonna mess up your name, and I'm sorry about it. I'm gonna try. Gursimrajit, I think is her name. Incorporating access issues in HTA. It will get complicated considering different dimensions of access. Will pharmaceuticals ever agree to comment on same as part of HTA process? Yeah, I want to just take this one to Sabrina. What do you think? Incorporating access issues into HTA, how do you do it?
I mean, I'm going to leave the how do you do it to Renita and Catherine, but I mean, I haven't thought about that, but I think that that's really interesting because it brings a different perspective to the conversation. So when these people are making those decisions, they have to take these things into consideration. And so, at the end of the day, how is it going to impact the patient? And I think that could be a really interesting perspective to bring. And I'm just thinking, there's an Alzheimer's drug that's going to be a game changer. And I don't know if it's been approved yet in Canada. Probably been approved in the US. I don't remember what it's called. But in order to do that, you need to do, I think it's an MRI. And so, we don't have an abundance of MRI machines here. So that is a potential access issue for a patient to get access to that game-changing drug. Yeah. So I can that would be really interesting to bring into that HTA conversation.
Yeah. Let's go to Renita and Catherine. What do you think? Incorporating access issues into HTA. Have you seen people do this successfully? How do we do it?
I really appreciate this question. I always have to mention third world and developing countries in this context, because all of the HTA bodies that we've mentioned so far have been in the first world. And I will say these questions of access are they are probably one of the biggest things that are facing the developing world right now, because as Sabrina mentioned, if we can't get access to an MRI or CT scan to even diagnose the patient, how will they be treated with a chemotherapy drug or radiotherapy drug that may not even be present in the geography that we're talking about? So these questions of access, they're much broader than I can even say to even incorporate into just the HTA. It's a much larger issue. But I will say that when you think about like, let's take, for example, a cancer drug. You have to think about the full process that the patient is going through. And I think we typically will call this journey mapping for the patient. And this involves the hospital, or it involves the process in which a patient is diagnosed and then proceeds to treatment. Where in the HTA process does this live? I will say I'm not familiar. I've seen sometimes it's mentioned in the burden of illness. I've seen sometimes it's, they talk a little bit in the humanistic component. But I will say I don't believe that this is a very large portion of the HTA process, as it currently is, and it likely needs to be, because we see not just in the developing world, but even in first world countries, access to COVID-19 drugs have had to be revised. Drugs have had to kind of had to revisit that process, simply because I will note in the UK, they had this exact issue where Pfizer had to revisit their HTA process, their submission, because it required a general practitioner to then go and prescribe the drug instead of just being available at the pharmacy for, over-the-counter treatment. Huge problem, restricted access to many patients for a drug that was very necessary for, a large amount of people. They do introduce a huge burden, but where does it live currently? That I can't really say. I've only seen it really in the humanistic burden or the burden of illness review, and that too a very small component of it.
Right. Well, let's think about it too. Like the HTA bodies that we're talking about are all just for their own jurisdiction, right? So you've got Canada, you've got the United States. They just care about their own geography. They don't really think about what that looks like. And so when you're putting together a global value dossier or whatever, right, to actually get approval, you're submitting to those HTA bodies in Europe. You're focused on that geography, and so oftentimes that the evidence that you put together for those geographies is going to be somewhat limited, right? And so yeah, I think there's maybe an access issue even to the whole HTA process. Not every country has a really robust HTA process and to apply to. So you're just sort of trying to figure that out. Yeah, I should also mention too, for Nested Knowledge, the sticker price on our website is high. It is directed towards the United States. We do have lower pricing for LMIC countries. So if you are a health economist operating in a different jurisdiction than we normally would sell our software to, reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you, and we can work with you on price to make sure that you have access to the software and that you can do good work in your geography. We want to make that possible worldwide for everybody. Okay, a couple other questions here to get through before we call it. Feel free, if you're out there in the audience, to chime in. We'd love to answer your question. That's a great question, and that feeds this discussion today. Your questions are interesting, and we want to answer them. Let's talk about definitions again, Sabrina. This is something that I know is near and dear to your heart. Personalized versus precision medicine. Are we saying the same thing? What is that?
When I was doing some reading on precision versus personalized, I went into such a rabbit hole that I don't know that I can come out of it. So
okay, yeah. Give us the executive summary here. What do you think?
Yeah. I think when we're talking about personalized versus precision, I don't think that anybody in North America is saying personalized anymore. I think that doesn't exist here. I think they're still using personalized medicine in Europe to mean what we're talking about here in North America as the omics-based medicine. But like I said, I went into such a rabbit hole that I don't even think that precision medicine is still that omics-based medicine anymore. And I think that is now starting to be coined as genomics medicine or omics medicine. And so like personalized precision, I guess it's interchangeable, but for me, like the patient-centered and the patient-centric, it doesn't mean the same thing. And so, precision medicine is that, use of medicine when I think everybody knows what precision medicine means. I don't need to define it, but I think personalized is like the approach to the care versus the actual treatment. And I think that we're no longer using it in North America because people were thinking that it was a treatment that was uniquely tailored to them. And so I think that fell out of favor. But I did come across a new term called personomics, which I thought was really interesting. Has anybody heard that?
I have not heard that term, but I like the rebrand as a marketing guy. It works for me. I don't know.
And I think this so that they're using personomics instead of personalized care.
Okay.
And so I'm going to read the definition that I found. Personomics recognizes that individuals are not only distinguished by their biological variability, but also by their personalities, health beliefs, social support networks, financial resources, and other unique life circumstances that have important effects on how and when a given health condition will manifest in that individual and how it will respond to treatment, which I thought was really interesting, like especially like the financial, which nobody really, we talk about it when we talk about social determinants of health, but we don't really talk about it when we're talking about medicine. And I think that is a really big social determinant of health, even in Canada, where the government is paying for medicine. So
great, catchy term. Good definition, solid definition to back it up and make sure it doesn't get co-opted and turned into something that it's not supposed to be. Good stuff. And I want to give you an opportunity too to just plug something I also know that you are passionate about and involved in. What is Precision Medicine Awareness Month?
Yeah, so imagine if all of this is difficult to explain in the medical world and it's like causing so much confusion, how it would be for patients. So like I think about something like super simple like biomarkers, where it's, we talk about biomarker testing, genomic testing, genetic testing, molecular profiling, comprehensive genomic profiling. So we're saying a lot of stuff. I think we're essentially talking about the same thing when we're talking about that. So Precision Medicine Month is really meant to help patients navigate this complex and overwhelming space, to give them an understanding of the basics and the potential of precision medicine so that they can make informed decisions and be active participants in their healthcare. But I think, when I think about precision medicine in March was Triple Negative Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and there was some data that was released out of the US. And so Black women are more likely to be diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer, but they're less likely to be referred for genomic testing. So for me, like Precision Medicine Awareness Month is a really important social media campaign that will educate patients so that they know, they understand, and whether they have a biomarker or a cancer that is actionable today or not, like they understand their treatment options, the potential side effects. So in a nutshell, that's what Precision Medicine Awareness Month is. And actually, the European Cancer Patients Coalition, ECPC, launched Personalized Medicine Awareness Month in 2018. And the Cancer Collaborative, as an affiliate member, we launched it in Canada in 2019. And so it runs the whole month of November. And it's being planned with Lung Cancer Canada, Colorectal Cancer Canada, the Canadian Breast Cancer Network, and Genome Canada, along with one of our oncologists in Ontario. So, I mean, obviously, everyone is invited to participate in sharing the message of the content, which will be out in November.
Well, I will make sure to update the description of this video so you have links to relevant information about all of these things and more. I also want to thank you, Sabrina, for hopping onto this webinar today, sharing your perspective on patient centricity, patient-centered, the difference there, etc. And yeah, I just want to plug a few things. So first of all, your organization is called Cancer Collab. So you can scan that QR code today on your smartphone, and you can find them at cancercollab.ca. And then if you have further questions, like if you didn't get to ask your question today because you're watching this after the fact, feel free to email Sabrina using this QR code, and that's Sabrina at cancercollab.ca, and you can follow up with her there and ask your question. Of course, don't hesitate to reach out to us if you want to know more information about Nested Knowledge. We're happy to answer your questions, etc. And I've got one more thing to plug as well. So we recently were on a podcast. So Catherine and Renita had a similar conversation on Sabrina's podcast, Cancer Collab Conversations, Collab Conversations, and that's available anywhere that you listen to podcasts. So that conversation, as well as others that she has had on this topic, are available. Spotify, Apple, all of them. You can go watch them and listen to them, and that's probably what I will be doing when I mow my lawn next. Thank you all for joining today, and thank you for your great questions. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Renita. Thank you, Sabrina. We'll talk soon.